All right.
I know, I saw that too.
I didn't watch it.
Instagram was blown up.
So we are starting a new lesson. What we're doing today is looking at solutions to quadratics. So we found our vertex before. We found axis of symmetry. This time around, we're going to find solutions, and they're not super tough right now, at least. So when I talk about solutions, there's a few different names. There's roots, zeros, or solutions, and they all mean the same thing. There's different ways to say it. So roots, zeros, solutions, I go back and forth and I will use different words, but they are all the same thing. And what they all mean is, where does your quadratic equal 0, or where does it cross the y-axis?
Mine says X.
Oh, sorry, x-axis, that's what I meant. I was thinking when y is 0. So where does your quadratic equal 0, or where does it cross the x-axis? So, if I were to look at our warm-up here,
It crosses the two spots.
it does. So if I were to look at our warm-up here, the first one when I typed in 0, I got 0, right?
Sure.
That is a solution. When
33, next one's 13.
what is x when y is 0? So we'll look at that more later. So the first way to answer is graph it and see where it crosses the x-axis. So there's actually two answers here. I have an answer. Let's see, my x-axis is left and right. I got x.
Is it 0, 2?
I am now. I have an answer here at -1
1, 0.
and an answer at 1. And when I talk about solutions, I go x equals. Because my solutions, y is always 0. I need to figure out what is x when y is 0. X is -1 and x is +1. Sometimes, a lot of times today, they're going to be kind of the same number, but positive and negative. Sometimes, though, they won't be.
Wait,
But a
so
lot of them today are going to be like
instead of giving like 2 points, we're just giving 1, but from where it's on
the negative version.
x-axis? Okay.
So a lot of them are going to be like this today, but they will not always be like this. So keep that in mind.
You gotta always be like
Sometimes today, but not always. So we're going to look at some of these solutions here. Let's look at x squared minus 1, which we actually just did. We just did x squared minus 1. And you don't have to graph these. I'm not entirely sure why I covered them. I probably shouldn't have. So we actually just did x squared minus 1, and I had two answers, at 1 and -1. If I were to graph just x squared, I want to know where is it 0. And on this is my graph right here. It's right here, and there's only one answer. I get x equals 0. And if I were to graph x squared plus 1, does my parabola right here, does it ever cross the x-axis?
No.
No. So I have no solution. And I'm going to go in S to abbreviate my no solution. That's which I begin. In S. In S. So it has to cross the x-axis. This doesn't. There's no solution. So as you go through these, remember, there will be 1, 2, or 0 answers. But when it's 0, we say no solution. So we're either going to go x equals 0, like this. This one we did in our last slide was x equals 1.
I don't understand. How do we
1.
plug it in? What do we do?
And then this one was no solution. Alright, and so we're just going to plug these into Desmos. So let's actually do this first one together. X squared minus 2 equals 0. So let me grab Desmos here. In order to graph this, all I need to do...
It's -2, -1.
So I'm just going to go x squared minus 2. I got my parabola right here, right? Desmos is nice because you see these little gray dots? They actually tell you where it crosses the x-axis.
What do you even need the table?
So I have, yep, we don't even need a table. I have 1.4 and -1.4. Those are my two solutions. Desmos is nice because it puts the little dots there for you. You just have to click on them. So my answers are 1.4, -1.4.
Wait, there's...
Hmm.
Okay, never mind.
So I get x equals 1.4, -1.4. That's it. You just got to plug it into Desmos.
That's weird. You put it 1.4 when he was -1 dash.
What?
Go back to the thing, Desmos.
Where?
What does that say?
-1. Why is it? It's 75.
It's really
really big. Alright. I get 1.4, negative 1.4. That's it. So remember, our answers are just the x, because y is always 0 for solutions, or roots are zeros. Y is always 0, so all I care about is x. Negative 1.4, 1.4. I want you guys to try one real quick by graphing. I want you to plug in 2x squared. And when you plug it in, you don't have to plug in the equals 0, just plug in 2x squared. And see, where does it cross the x-axis?
0.
So click on it. See what that is.
Zero.
Nope.
You're my
It's-
person.
X
Mine is open.
It's 0. I put the 8 there just for fun. I just wanted to keep doing that.
Okay.
You're sick, go home.
I wish. But I think there's already 2 people gone. Isn't Ms. Kennedy gone?
Yeah,
And
Miss Hall.
Wait,
He's
Kennedy's
gone?
gone?
It's Mr. Branson.
Oh,
Branson.
Okay.
Oh, that's right. It's Branson. Yeah, I don't think we could have 3 out of 4 teachers gone. That would be bad.
Nope, cancel school. Cancel school.
Hey, take that headphone out, Caleb. Other side too, you nerd. Alright, Caleb, what do you get for your solution?
No solution.
Close, but not quite. Doesn't it cross at one spot?
0.
It crosses at 0. X equals 0. So when I look at this one, I get 2x squared, right? 2x squared. It kind of looks like a no solution, but it actually crosses right here at this very bottom at 0. No, because we have a second part. So this is the first part, not super tough. We just plug it in Desmos, see where it crosses. The next piece though is a little different. It's not very tough, but it's a little tougher. So the second way to find your solutions is to solve for x. So I'm going to solve x squared minus 1 equals 0. That means I need to get the x by itself.
That's 1,
And
right?
we're doing, remember PEMDAS? We're doing PEMDAS backwards. Okay. So we're going to do the add subtract first. So we have to get rid of the squared, we got to get rid of the minus 1. We're getting rid of minus 1 first by doing the opposite of that, which is plus 1. I'm going to plus 1 on both sides.
Which one I get to leave?
It's not quite 1, you're close though. I get x squared equals 0 plus 1 is 1, right? Alright, I got to get rid of this squared. Does anybody know what the opposite of a power of 2 of a squared is?
Divide.
No.
I was just guessing.
Alright, I'm just curious if anybody knows. You don't have to know, I'm just wondering. I guess no. Alright, the opposite of a square
It's a
square root.
circle.
Is a square root. So we have to square root both sides. So when I square root, the square root and this power of 2, they cancel out and they are gone. And I just have the x left over. And then over here on the right side, I have the square root of 1. So let me go back to Desmos so we can plug that in. Get rid of this extra stuff. So my square root of 1, my square root button is this little check mark by the pi and the ABC. You have to get that first and then you type in 1. And I get, what's my square root of 1? 1. But there's something not quite right yet. The square root of 1 is 1. But we got to keep in mind, whenever we make a square root ourselves, so I plugged in my square root myself, right? We actually get 2 answers. We get a positive version and a negative version. So there are actually 2 answers, 1 and negative 1. You were half right. You got the negative 1. So there's a 1 and a negative 1. So we gotta be careful. And the reason we have this, it's x squared equals 1. If I look at the step right before it, right? It's x squared equals 1. What happens when I plug in 1 in for x? What's 1 squared? Is 1, right? What about what's negative 1 squared? What's negative 1 squared?
1.
Also positive 1, because a negative times a negative is a positive. That's why we have 2 answers. So my answers are x equals 1 and negative 1. So be careful. If you just did 1, you're only half right.
Nope. Really?
So we're going to practice this a little bit more. We're going to look at 3x squared minus 75 equals 0. So remember, we are doing PEMDAS backwards.
Okay, so it's
subtract
75
and
equals
add.
3x squared.
Yep.
And then
So let's take it a step at a time. Just because you can do your pen.
No way.
So that means I'm going to get rid of minus 75 first. I'm going to plus 75 on both sides.
God, that's so long.
I have a 3x squared equals 75.
You should just put them in the first place.
Now I've got to get rid of either the 3 or the squared. And because I'm doing PEMDAS backwards, there's no more add or subtract, right? That means next I'm doing
So
multiply
3.
divide, which means I got to get rid of the times 3 next. By doing the opposite, which is divide by 3.
What would that be like? Wait, no, shh.
You get x squared equals
Oh, no, I don't know.
25. 25. Alright, and then I have to get rid of the squared by doing the opposite, which is a square root. I just got a square root. Square root on both sides. And I'm going to get x equals, well, let me go in here into some Desmos. I'm going to get rid of this 1 for 25. What's the square root?
You're home.
We get 5, right? But we got to be careful. I made the square root myself, which means I also have negative 5. So be careful with that.
Can we just get the homework?
Well,
Yeah.
we're almost there. Be patient. And on this next one, t squared equals 144. Do I have to do anything other than square root it? No. We're just going to square root it. Is 12. Yeah. So, square root of 144 is 12, but because I made the square root myself, it's also negative 12. Be careful. Be careful.
So if you don't make it yourself, it's just
Yeah, so for example, if you're given a math problem and it's like square root of 36. Yes. That's not anything bad. I'll show it to Mr. Heinrich. So, for example, if you're given this problem, square root of 36, that is just 6, not negative 6. You only have the negative version when you make the square root yourself. Whenever you do the opposite of this squared, that's the only time you get a negative version. So keep that in mind.
Wait, what?
What?
Whoa.
Whoa.
I'm just kidding.
Alright, I want you guys to try one. I want you to do part A. Part A. As an in-class problem. And we'll go over it in a minute. I wish. I wish.
Yeah, we were.
I know.
Squared equals 36.
You would.
And then if you go on to Desmos and square root it, shouldn't it be like 6? Yeah.
Ugh.
So
I blame you guys for getting
negative
sick.
6.
I bet one of you guys was a jerk and like, I'm sick. I'm gonna cough on my paper that Mr. Belky's reading, so he gets sick.
Jake wasn't here on Thursday.
You're supposed to put.
I bet it was him.
It was only, I shook your hand Thursday for the parent teacher conferences. I mean,
That was it.
Yeah, I still.
Coughed on it right before.
Yeah,
Did
on purpose.
No, we did.
Yeah, last week I just had, I was just like, I still had a cold.
No.
Now I got this
I
cough.
just sneezed on his hand and
It's
shook with
the
his hand
grades
and spelled what it was.
My room, do what I want.
Let me go in this room. Go to sleep.
Alright. I want you to do about another 15 more seconds.
Just do number C ahead of time, guys.
Do number C.
No, man, don't do
Number
it.
C.
You don't know how.
Number C.
Dude,
You
go back
mean
to
letter C? Is that M equals 6?
Alright, let's look. Lily, what's the first thing we're gonna do?
0 equals 4d squared. And then
Yep. So first thing we're gonna do is plus 36 on both sides.
4.
I'm gonna get m squared equals 36. Roy, what am I doing next?
Then you have to find the square root.
Yep, square root it. And what do I get when I square root it?
6. M equals 6.
Mm-hmm. And because I made the square root myself, I don't just have 6, I also have
Negative.
negative 6.
Oh, I
So
put X
remember that.
instead of M.
That's fine.
I put.
Alright, we're actually gonna look at part B together real quick.
Nope.
So if I'm gonna solve part B, what's the first thing I need to do, Jake?
Minus 15.
Yep, we're gonna minus 15 on both sides. And I get 3x squared equals negative 15. Lucas, what would I do next?
Oh, you divide by 3.
Yep, we're gonna divide by 3.
That's weird.
And I get x squared equals -5. Greg, what's my last step?
Would be no answer.
We're gonna talk about it.
Yes.
What's my last step, Greg?
Oh, it's just something else.
You're supposed to square root
Yeah, we're gonna square root it, right? Alright, so real quick, on Desmos,
Undefined.
what's the square root of -5?
Undefined.
Undefined.
Alright, square root of -5 is undefined, right?
Yep.
-5 says undefined. What that means is we can't ever square root a negative, because what this is asking, what number times itself equals a negative number?
That's, I can't.
So it can't happen, right? At least
So
not
no
yet.
solution.
We'll learn about it in Algebra 2. We did some imaginary numbers. But this says undefined, so my answer is no solution. So whenever it says undefined, it's really no solution. It means it doesn't cross the x-axis at all. So, yeah. So it doesn't actually work. You get no solution.
Any negative
Alright.
has no solution.
What?
Any negative has no solution.
Whenever you square root a negative, yeah.
Okay.
So if you can remember that, you don't actually have to try to plug it in. But make sure you solve it first, because maybe the square root, the negative goes away after you add something.
So
It's
go
like-
keep for C, D,
something-
just
oh my
for
God.
4D
I
squared,
swear to
you
God,
just
it
divide by 4.
it was,
Both
yeah.
sides when you,
Minus 16 first.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's just-
And then divide by 4. But you still get 0, right?
Yeah.
Alright, you guys want to try part C, or you think you're good?
What's it called, Lucas? What's it called?
Alright.
You don't even know.
Alright, let's skip your exit ticket.
What is it?
Answer on your exit ticket. Answer both these. I will turn on Socrative in just a minute. And then I'll put your homework on Google Classroom. Oh, and Greg, remind me to give you the code for Google Classroom, so you can get those homework too.